Hey, what's up, everybody? So, welcome back. So, this is the second video in the series of where we look at Steve Greenberg's motion to dismiss the RICO charges against R. Kelly in New York. So, for those of you who have not been paying attention, basically, R. Kelly has been smacked with a RICO charge in New York, and this motion filed by R. Kelly's attorney, Steve Greenberg, is a motion to have those thrown out, right? Have the RICO charge thrown out. Now, in my opinion, as I stated in the video earlier, if this motion is successful, then what happens is that I believe the entire New York case basically becomes null and void, because at that point it's going to be so weak that they won't really be able to prosecute R. Kelly. At least that's my opinion. And I think even if this motion fails, what possibly could happen is that Steve Greenberg forces the New York prosecutors to come out early and fight and in exposed position, and he could potentially gain information of what the New York prosecutors plan to use in their strategy, right? So if you don't know by now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just some guy on the internet, basically reading legal documents for your reading pleasure. So take what I say with a grain of salt, right? So just moving on, basically, here are some of the things that I noticed in this motion. I'm not going to read the entire motion. What I've done is that I've highlighted particular parts of the motion that I thought was noteworthy. Maybe in a separate video series, or maybe even in this video series, I'll actually read the entire motion for those of you that have a fetish for this type of thing, right? So anyway, just moving along. Basically, the first thing I noticed is that Greenberg says the alleged predicated acts purportedly occurred sporadically between 1994 and 2017, the majority of which bear little connection to the Eastern District of New York. So to me, I think this is a very good point, because basically he's saying not much has actually happened in New York. Most of this stuff probably happened in Chicago or elsewhere. So New York is the wrong place to basically bring the RICO charge, if a RICO charge is to be brought. That's how I read this, right? Now, of course, I'm pretty sure he's not saying these allegations actually happened, but these allegations are alleged to have happened elsewhere, and very little has actually happened in New York. So therefore, New York is the wrong jurisdiction for the RICO charge to be brought, right? So just moving right along, another thing that I found noteworthy is that Greenberg says Act 1 is an outlier and accuses Mr. Kelly of bribing a government official to produce ID for the fake identification of Jane Doe number 1. No other charges related to Jane Doe number 1, and the superseded indictment is silent on how the predicated act fits into the overall purpose of the enterprise. Now, I've actually watched several videos and I've read several articles, but over time, things just become kind of fuzzy to you, and I didn't really think to capture the specifics in my mind. But basically, from my understanding, from what everyone is saying, and from the information that I received, Jane Doe number 1 is alleged to be Aaliyah, right? So if this is wrong, please correct me. Leave your questions and comments below and correct me and let me know if I'm wrong about Jane Doe number 1, right? So basically, Jane Doe number 1 is Aaliyah, right? So if it is Aaliyah, the thing I'm confused about, I thought all the alleged bribery happened in Chicago and not New York. So is it possible that some of the bribery took place, or some of the allegations of the alleged bribery took place in New York? Is it possible that maybe some type of documentation, such as a birth certificate or ID, happened in New York, and then they went to Chicago to actually get the marriage license? Or is it the other way around? Did they get the marriage license in New York, but the identification came from Chicago? I don't know. I would have to stop the recording of this video to go back and basically get those details. it's not really worth it. I'd rather, someone basically come out and correct me and tell us what is the actual sequence of events and where these events happen. But at any rate, he's basically saying that one allegation is an outlier. And by outlier, he means something that's way out in left field that shouldn't even be included in all this. And beyond that, you're not even saying how that one allegation actually fits into the RICO enterprise. So I find this to be very interesting. Not sure how it's going to play out, but at any rate, moving on. And then he goes, finally and importantly, when reviewing an indictment for sufficiency, common sense must control. So this makes a lot of sense. Again, I am not a lawyer and I'm just some guy on the internet, but I do believe that common sense basically should rule in something like this. You have to, and I think he's basically arguing that you have to determine whether or not R. Kelly had a legitimate enterprise, or if he used his enterprise or his business to basically use it as a criminal organization, right? And in order to figure all that out, you really just have to use common sense, right? So again, I mentioned the one guy who comes to my page from time and time again, once in a while, and he basically made some really good comments about R. Kelly and R. Kelly being able to prove that he had a legitimate organization because he was filing taxes, he was performing, and everything about his organization or his company was legit. And basically there's no way that you can look at his organization and basically using common sense, right? If you're using common sense, there's no way that you can look at R. Kelly's organization and then think that it's a enterprise for illegal activity, right? So that's basically the argument that Greenberg is basically making here. You have to use common sense when you're looking at these things. And if you use common sense, you'll probably find that RICO, if anything, even with the allegations, RICO is not one of the proper allegations, right? And I think he basically hits on this more, but I'm not really going to talk about this right now. I'll just wait until we come across it again. And he basically goes on to say an indictment does not pass muster simply because it parrots the language of the statute where the definition of an offense includes generic terms. It is not sufficient that the indictment shall charge the offense in the same generic terms as in the definition, but it must state the species and must descend into particulars. So I think this is a really good point. Now, I didn't read the New York indictment, but basically what I understand he's saying that when you read the indictment, it's not giving you any specific details. It's just basically giving you generic language saying, that R. Kelly had a criminal enterprise and the criminal enterprise did criminal activities. So to me, I understand it that he's saying the indictment reads really generic. It's really robotic. It doesn't have any specific details, and the specific details are necessary in order to basically have a bona fide indictment. You just can't read the statute and basically say the person committed the statute, but your indictment must have details on how the person specifically violated the statute. That's what I get out of this. Leave your questions, comments below. Let me know if you're wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. And let me know what you think he means by this. Moving along. And then he goes on to say the allegations regarding the enterprise on the face of the indictment are simply inadequate to meet the legal requirements of a cognizable RICO enterprise in fact, or the government's ability to prove them at trial. Accepting those facts as true and based on the arguments that follow, the court may and should dismiss count one. And basically this section is self-explanatory, but he's basically saying that all the allegations doesn't meet the requirements for a RICO charge, basically. And then he basically continues saying essentially the same thing, in my opinion. The indictment fails to properly allege a legal cognizable RICO enterprise, so count one must be dismissed. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is where it talks about some of the things that I spoke about earlier. He basically says a single person acting in the manner that Mr. Kelly allegedly did does not formally form a legal cognizable RICO enterprise under the law, right? And then he goes in to basically explain that, but we'll just continue on. And it basically says the federal RICO statute was designed to prevent an illicit infiltration of legitimate enterprises, and stating the RICO's purpose was the elimination of the infiltration of organized crime and racketeering into legitimate organizations operating in interstate commerce. So here, what I understand he's saying is that he's saying that basically a RICO enterprise is basically one that was created and organized for the purpose of basically doing illegal activity, or it's one where bad actors basically came in and they took over an organization to use it for illegal purposes, right? But actually, I thought this was actually going to flow into this section here. A single person acting in the manner that Mr. Kelly did does not formally form a legal cognizable RICO enterprise under the statute of law. So let me just talk about this for a minute. Basically, he's saying that one person does not make up an enterprise. And again, I was going to talk about this earlier in the video, but I wanted to hold off. It looks like he's made this point kind of like sporadically throughout the motion, and to me, I think he should have kept all of this particular argument in one section instead of having it spread out. But basically, he's saying one person does not make up an enterprise, and R. Kelly had proof, or he has proof, or if you use common sense, you'll see that basically R. Kelly had a music business. He was out promoting, and he was out trying to get bookings for his business. And when he was actually on tour, he was out there basically performing, and he had a organization that basically did what a music organization does for a performer. And it just so happens that and that part of this whole thing is that sometimes you want to relax and sometimes you want to go out and have a nice time, but by you being on tour, you can't actually do all those things because you're probably burned out from performing. So you naturally leave some of the entertainment to your employees, right? So your employees are probably going to be responsible for coordinating, having your friends and family come out and see you. They would be responsible for coordinating, having your girlfriend fly out to come and see you and maybe spend a weekend with you. They would be responsible for coordinating the after parties when you're out in a different city. But those activities or the coordination of your employees doesn't make up a criminal enterprise. They're just simply doing their job, and they don't have anything to gain from doing those activities, right? So let's just move along. Another point that he makes is that we are satisfied that the RICO statute was not designed to serve as a recidivist statute imposing heavier sentences for crimes which are already punishable under other acts. Now, recidivist basically is a confusing word. I looked it up. Basically, it means repeat offender, but in this case, they're using the word recidivist to mean that you have this statute used to continuously punish people or to give people heavier sentences for crimes that are already punishable. So that's one of his core arguments, is he's saying, hey, there's several other statutes and crimes that you can punish him with. Why punish him with this one? Why use this statute? Why use the RICO statute to basically punish him when you can punish him uh, if he's actually guilty? You can punish him with all these other statutes and common law grounds. You know what? I'm just going to stop this video right here because it's getting really long and I didn't intend for it to get this long. So I'm just going to stop it and then we'll continue on with another video later on. Hey, thank you for watching. Leave your questions, comments below, and like, share, and subscribe.